My name is Arturo Serrano. This is rendering and graphics programming. So what I did for question number one was to create a new class in a new texture file called color selected 3D optimize. And what this new class does is to minimize the matrix multiplication. In this case, the camera matrices, which we previously have the world and the view and the projection matrix. Now in the constant buffer, I just have a single matrix with a selected color. And what my code actually does is to send a pre-computed view and projection matrix in along with the world matrix, which is then computed here in my color select 3D optimize class, and then it just pushed to the pipeline. So I'm just having the GPU do a single multiplication, which is the world and the view and the projection. And this is my file. Then for question number two, I will be using that same texture class in order to render the five objects. So on my tracing, I pre-compute the view and the projection matrix. So I just declare it and then get the matrices and multiply them. Then I just render each object and then push the data, the world matrix, and the already pre-computed view and projection matrix, set the color, and I do that for all the five objects. And then when I hit run, I should be getting the five cubes, and the FPS is around 1500, probably the average. And it's not clearly see the performance, but on the further work I will be testing more the same shader file that I just created. What I did for question number three was to make a new pyramid model to work with the texture. So for that I will be using the duplicate vertex technique. So for each face I will be having a duplicate vertex with the correct UV values. So those are very important for each face. And all the faces have three vertex and one triangle except for the bottom one. It's going to render as a two triangles, but the texture is going to render as a square. And for that, I made sure that each vertex has the correct UV values. Then on the dx.cpp, everything is as the standard, setting up the vertex shader, pixel shader, the sampler. I just need to make sure that I'm loading the correct texture alignment test. And then for the draw scene, it's going to be the same. Uh, Clearing the back buffer, sending the constant buffer data, and rendering our object. Then when I hit run, I should be getting the pyramid with the correct texture. Now here's our pyramid, and it renders correctly all of the sides. What I did for question number four was very similar to what I did on question number three, which is set up a new model with the correct faces and the correct UV values for each vertex. And for each face, I will be having four vertices and two triangles to render. And other than that, everything is pretty similar to question number three. All the pixel shader, vertex shader, the layout. It only changes the texture that I'm loading. So this time I'm loading the cube faces. And on the draw scene, it's pretty standard stuff. I push the data for the custom buffer, and when I hit render, I should be getting the new cube, the new model cube with the new texture, and it wraps correctly. Left both left, back, right, front, butt, and top. What I did for question number 5 was to encapsulate all the data needed to control the texture HLS file. So for that one, I created a new shader texture class, and for that I used the header that was provided with the functions that the professor already gave us. So I just fill them out, and I just make sure to match on our private data to match the texture file with the structure of the camera matrices and the world matrix, and set up the correct buffer which match perfectly with the texture file. Then on our shader texture, I'll make sure to load up the texture file and to set up the correct layout, which is position and then text coordinate, which match perfectly with our vertex shader input and output. So I also load up here the buffer required for the camera matrix and the world matrix, and to handle those, I made separate functions to push the data into the constant buffer. I create a new camera matrix, and then I just set up accordingly the view, the projection, and also with the world one into send world function. I also made a shader texture destructure, which releases both the buffers, and on the shader texture, set texture resolver and sampler. It will take the texture as a parameter and then set it as a context from call it from the shaded base. So that's the work we need to do here. Then for we just need to clean up the init demo on our dxapp.cpp. We can create a new texture from our new shader texture class and a new texture from the texture class, and just load up the correct one. So I just load up the cube faces. We instantiate the model and we set it to context. We just need to initialize the world matrix too, and that's all the work needed in the init demo. And then for the draw scene, we clear the back buffer and the depth stencil buffer, and here is where we actually push all the data to the texture. So we push the meta context to the texture and also the actual texture that was loaded previously, and we send up the matrix and in data, which is the world one, the projection, and the view one. We set up the we set to context the model, and then we just render it. And I already have it running right here, and it renders perfectly fine, just like the question number 4. For the further work questions, part 1, I'm running 3 different models with 3 different textures. So on the left side, I'm running a simple box model which didn't have the UV value set up, so they will set up to 0. So wherever value is at 0, 0 on the texture, it will wrap around all the faces of the cube. And then for the mirror one, this one was pretty interesting to see. I changed the texture that I have, which was the right one, to be the checkers, the white and red, and it grabbed whatever UV value was at that position, and each pair of sides match as a contrary. So the left side was white, then on the right one was red, and it's the same for all of them. So on the front we have red and then white, and then on the back we'll have inverted the colors to be red and white, which is pretty interesting. And then on the right one I use the repeated model box, and that will just grab whatever the texture is and then just uh, repeat it all around the faces. Now for further work question number 2, I will be running the demo number 16, which has which doesn't have an optimized shader version, so in the texture file. So when I run it, I'm getting this. I'm getting this scene which has the thousand cubes, and it's running at 160. We can say it's averaging 160 to 170, and I'll be also running my optimized version. The optimized version only has one matrix, the world beyond the projection, and I already stated that the beyond the projection matrix are calculated. I mean they're pre-computed. So on our draw scene, I pre-compute the beyond the projection values uh, just once, and then I just push it along the world matrix in order for the texture file to do just one multiplication per vertex, and that gives us a boost over 200 FPS roughly. So it is about 20% speed increase.